All right. Well, it seems like any rush has slowed down a little bit here, so we'll go ahead and get started, and anyone who joins us can jump right in. Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Wallace, and I have the pleasure of working in the Office of Alumni and Parent Engagement and working with wonderful folks like yourself to put together these virtual programs to complement our in-person programs. So we thank you again for joining us today. And the chat feature will be open throughout the call. So if you have questions as things pop into your mind, feel free to put those there. We may have our panelists address some of them in the moment, and we will probably reserve the bulk of them for the end for a little bit of a Q&A session after our folks have gotten a chance to chat and share a bit more about their careers and their areas of expertise. So again, thank you so much. If you want to watch back this event or share it with any friends, it is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel, which we will share out with you all after the event. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Erin Salva.
Thanks, Kim, and welcome everyone. I'm pleased to have so many folks here today to join in this conversation, and especially the panelists who have agreed to share their stories with regards to their involvement in disability work. I just retired in January of 2021. No, wait, sorry, 2022. Pandemic time, right? And prior to that, I started at Kenyon in 1999. So I did 22 years in disability services at Kenyon. And prior to that, had worked in education, K-12, working with students with disabilities in the elementary setting. So what I thought we would do is just start out with our panel and let them tell you a little bit about themselves and their roles in disability services. So we'll start with Emma. And Emma, I'd like you to just tell us a little bit about yourself, your current role, and also how you entered the disability field.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Emma Sajsa, and I graduated from Kenyon in 2014. And then I went on to get my master's in music therapy. And I don't know that I have a story about how I entered the disability field other than I wanted to be a music therapist. I really wanted to kind of use my music degree in sort of an altruistic way, maybe, just kind of, I'm not much of a performer, so I kind of wanted to transition into the medical field a little bit, but also keep that creative arts piece. And I was working in inpatient psychiatry in Denver, Colorado, until fairly recently. And now I work as a case manager, care coordinator at a medical clinic. So I kind of help people find mental health resources now.
Thanks so much, Emma. And Margot, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role and perhaps how you entered the disability field?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Margot Greenlee. Hello, everyone. I'm the artistic director of BodyWise Dance, and we are a company of neurodivergent artists. We make dances, both recorded and in person, that are about the important things in daily life. And we use dance to practice physical, social, emotional skills that we need when we're out in the community or with our families or at work. And I'm so excited to see Danny. Danny's been dancing with me ever since COVID started. We began a weekday 10 a.m. class late March 2020. And so 600 plus classes later, Danny and I are really good at dancing together online. Yeah, Amy's here too. Thank you so much, Amy. So the way it was not a straight line from being a professional dancer to working in the field of disability. I think two really important things happened. I was invited to participate in a artist program at Georgetown University Hospital's pediatric intensive care unit. And so I started making bedside dances, essentially, with patients, their family members, and medical professionals. And I realized, wow, okay, so tons of improvisation chops, like knocking on the door, making the invitation that allows kids to say yes or no, because saying no is not really allowed in their health experience. So sometimes saying no to an artist is exactly what they need that day. But more often than not, we would, I remember the very first day, I walked into a room and probably, I don't know, like a 12-year-old was like laying back in the bed doing something. And I was like, hey, um, you feel like moving a little bit? And within 5 minutes, he was doing disco drop splits on the ground, right? So that process of opening the conversation, allowing people to step in and kind of be the most themselves, I feel was the big lesson there. And then my uncle was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so I got really interested in the Dance for PD program that Mark Morris Dance Group in Brooklyn developed. So I was getting just a lot of experience, exposure, training, and then, 10 years later, I'm still doing this work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Margot. And Janet, can you tell us about your role and a little bit about yourself and how you perhaps arrived at where you are now?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Janet Lord, and I graduated from Kenyon in 1988, and I was a history major. And I went on to study law, unusually at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, where I did my junior year abroad. So I had a strong love for Scotland. And I discovered their international public law. And I then did some more postgraduate legal studies back in the United States at GW Law School. And I became very captivated and engaged in the international campaign to ban landmines. And that the process to draft a treaty was sort of ongoing at that point. And I, became very interested in that, did some volunteer work for the UN Disability Program. And after a short stint at a rather boring job at the World Bank, I became an advocacy director and legal counsel at an international nonprofit that was part of the international campaign to ban landmines. So I thought I'd be working there as someone who was involved in monitoring the mine ban treaty and working with landmine survivors. And I did that, but the other thing I became involved with almost from the start, this was right after 9/11, and Mexico initiated a treaty process before the United Nations to develop a human rights treaty on the rights of persons with disabilities. It's just kind of out of the blue in some respects. And so I became involved in the drafting process, and then very much immersed in that and in advancing that treaty effort and implementing it. And I see a longtime colleague and fellow Kenyon grad on this call, Jerry Mendez, who was incredibly instrumental in introducing me to the field of international development and particularly disability inclusive development. And Jerry sent me to Liberia. I didn't have a clue, but he said he'd help me figure things out. And I was able to work with organizations of persons with disabilities who were participating in the first election process in about 14 years after the Liberian Civil War. So I also became very interested in working with groups in very difficult post-conflict settings. And so in my current role, I'm essentially a consultant these days, and I'm an advisor to the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, an independent expert who helps prod countries in implementing their treaty obligations with regard to disability rights. And I'm also part of the Harvard Law School Project on Disability, where I do a lot of my research and writing. But my career has really been in sort of helping to integrate disability into mainstream human rights and also trying to integrate disability into mainstream international development projects. So that's kind of the sum total of my work, and I'll say more about that later in the panel.
Thanks, Janet, so much. It's kind of a great testament to the alumni connection, right? The alumni network connection at Kenyon, how wonderful it is. And Jerry was in touch with our office during my time there as well. And we were working on a project that never quite got off the ground, but let's turn to sharing. Let's look at sharing a highlight of your work in your field, in the field of disabilities. And Janet, do you want to start with that? What's a highlight of one that you can share with us?
Sure. I mean, really the highlight of my experience in the international disability rights realm is, was the adoption of this UN Treaty on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. When we started out up at the UN in 2002, only a handful of countries had any kind of developed disability law and policy. Many countries had disability exclusion and discrimination written right into their legal frameworks. And even in places like the United States that had a somewhat developed legal framework on disability rights, implementation was lagging. So the process by which this treaty was negotiated, and where at the start, maybe we had about 30 disability rights activists at the UN. By the end of the process, there were 800 disability advocates representing civil society from every corner of the globe. So it was an extraordinary process that brought not only states together and decision makers from states, but also civil society organizations from around the world. And it was an extraordinary process, and we probably couldn't have imagined at the time it would result in the change that it has resulted in. We have a long way to go, as all of you know, who work in the disability realm. But now there's well over 185 countries that have actually ratified the treaty. Incredible law reform that's happened around the world. And really innovative practices of disability inclusion, including in some of the most, poor countries in the world or conflict-affected countries. There's been remarkable change, and the treaty has really brought about changes not only within states, but also within the way we do humanitarian assistance, or the way we think about human rights, or the way we do international development projects in a much more intentionally inclusive way. So I think for me, the high mark of my career was being involved in that process, seeing it adopted, and then working towards its implementation.
Great, thanks. And Margot, how about you? What's a highlight that you might want to share with the group?
I would say that it is connecting with fellow artists around the world who are interested in inclusive practices. Sometimes the work can feel kind of lonely because we're, maybe just working in the rehearsal studio a lot. And so to really consider what we do as kind of a local laboratory for discovering best practices. And then we get to meet people from all over the world who are, maybe doing really different stuff, or wow, it's so similar. No wonder, you find these universal ways of connecting to people with different types of, brains and bodies. And so it's really satisfying to keep learning from all these different places in the world and the different cultures. That's my favorite thing right now.
Cool, thank you. And Emma, do you have something you'd like to share with regards to highlighting the work that you've done?
Sure. I feel like my career is relatively young, but I think I work one-on-one with a couple of music therapy clients every week, and I think just the connections I've been able to make with them, and sort of, it's really been my goal to kind of re-examine how we view different treatments and really make the process more collaborative. And I think that music can be a really great tool for that. So, while in school I may have learned that like all stroke survivors want to do X in their treatment, or this is, these are the goals you should be working on. I've really made it a point to just not operate that way and to really have my clients guide the process, especially because this is all voluntary and it should be, it should be enjoyable and actually meaningful for them. So I've just really enjoyed particularly working with one client who's a stroke survivor, who really just wants to work on singing and, was a performer before their stroke, and is kind of, it's just been really great to work with them every week and kind of see the progress that they're making. So.
Thanks so much. Do you want to continue a little bit and maybe share something that one of the biggest challenges that you may have faced in your career so far?
Yes, sure. I think for me, there are a lot of challenges, I have to say, especially now that I work in the mental health field directly. It has been made really clear to me how inaccessible mental health services are, and also just how little support there is, especially for folks with really severe mental illnesses. I think we do like to pride ourselves in this country on our progress with like deinstitutionalization and kind of making spaces more accessible and making, just providing more resources. And at least in my experience, that hasn't really been true with mental health. I think it's still really institutionalized and really inaccessible. And on my bad days, that just makes me really sad. So.
I hear you, especially in these post-pandemic times. This is a very, very challenging time and high demand with few providers, I think, as you mentioned earlier. And Margot, how about you? What's some of the biggest challenges that you face in your work?
I would say that the D word, dance, is a major obstacle. Here in the United States, especially where there are a lot of judgments around people's bodies. Most people, actually, let me just ask, of the people that I can see, how many of you love to go out dancing? Like, wave at me if you love to go out dancing. Okay, we got a couple. Wave your hand also if you've ever been told that you either don't have a sense of rhythm, have two left feet, or right, some other horrible judgment around our dances. Yeah, so I think when I start to talk about dance, a lot of people, and its value in education or in healthcare, a lot of people hear the word dance and they're just like, they're gone. They're remembering a trauma around dance. So if I can pull them back, I start to explain that most of the dance in the United States, I would say 99% of dance classes are exclusive, right? A master walks in, we are all supposed to do what the master tells us to do. We're supposed to look kind of like them, or, there's all sorts of stuff around what we should look like. And my career has really been this dramatic change from exclusivity, because I grew up in the ballet world, to radical inclusion. Because an inclusive dance class is full of essentially open-ended structures where people can participate in the way that works best for their body right now, right? And as a choreographer, I love ensemble. I mean, ballet is cool for its own thing because everybody's all doing the same thing. And there's, whether we're watching what is it called? The big football thing, the Super Bowl halftime, where 100 people are all doing the same movement, and you're just like, that's like so amazing. The human brain loves to see that sense of coordination. It's why we love to watch birds in the sky as they flock around with each other. But as a choreographer, I love variety because it gives me so much more material, right? So if I put out a prompt, can I do that right now? Can I just throw out a prompt? Okay, so thank you. Okay, experiment with me for a moment. Point to the place on your body that most wants to move right now. I might not be able to see that. Point to the place that most wants to move on your body right now. Yeah, I'm gonna say, there we go, right. And give that place, like, let that place start to circle a little bit. Can you put some circles in that place? Right? Okay, so now I've got like 10 things that are happening in front of me. And as the choreographer director, I can start to edit, right? So I get to be the instigator, the facilitator, and the editor. I don't have to generate everything. And I love that. I love that way of working. And I learned that at the feet of my former director, Liz Lerman, who is really a wonderful, kind of blaze trail maker, whatever you want to call her. So yes, the hard thing about what I do is that I say the word dance and people freak out. And then if I can go a little bit further, people are like, oh, I'm dancing all the time. And my body and my brain are designed to dance. And my body and my brain are designed to learn and think and process and remember with movement. Oh, well, that's super cool, right? But boy, is that first part of the conversation not always very easy.
Yeah, very cool. And I like that that little example that we all got to move a little bit to and experiment with, the diversity, the uniqueness of the way in which we all want to move, right? And that part of what you mentioned there is also that confronting the norms of conformity, celebrating diversity, which is really a big part of the work that you're doing. Janet, how about you? What are some of the big challenges that you face in your work? I'm sure there are many.
Yeah, yes, there are many. The extreme marginalization of disability as a human rights issue has been very prominent throughout my career and early stages before the disability treaty came about. Often we were, me and Jerry, the Martians in the room, talking about disability in a mainstream setting, and it really was strange. And there were very prominent human rights activists who really quite seriously would say, well, we do human rights, not disability rights, as though they are something, it's something, not the same thing. So that marginalization of disability has been an incredible challenge, but that marginalization of disability as an issue and a human rights issue has also been led to really interesting and opportune entry points. For example, working in more closed societies, working in more authoritarian regimes, disability is actually quite a nice entry point. It's kind of non-threatening, right? When you peel away the layers, there's a lot going on that ought to be kind of scary for people, but it has been a really nice entry point to work in some very difficult places fairly successfully, and working with trying to give voice to organizations of people with disabilities, whether participating in an electoral process or pressing forward on inclusive education or a variety of other types of issue areas. So it's a way to do human rights that appears to be less threatening very often. So although a challenge, it's a very challenging to get people to take this issue seriously, even though the world's 15% of the world's population has a disability. This is a very big issue. It's marginalization and also the stigma associated with disability means that it can be very difficult to get to a conversation that is situating disability within a human rights framework or a social model understanding, as opposed to a very narrow medical model issues. So those norms around disability certainly are continue to be very challenging, but the fact that we have a common language, thanks to this UN treaty that's very broad and comprehensive, has been incredibly helpful in cutting through some of that. Still there, it still persists, but the treaty has really had an incredible impact in at least opening up minds and opening up some space to talk about full participation of people with disabilities in all domains.
Thanks. Trying to find the unmute button. Thanks, Janet. I'll just open this up to the panel and you can jump in as you see fit. Like maybe share some of the opportunities or what you perceive as the opportunities in your specific field.
I'll jump in. Yeah, sorry, Janet. What I'm seeing is that if we are able to make improvements for people with disabilities, it actually helps all of us, right? So here in the United States, we have an incredible array of policies in place that ensure education, and we're getting smarter about city design. Even when we step into a museum, museums are starting to be aware of including plain language signage. Guess what? That helps me, right? I can't go to a museum. I can't stand there and read stuff and look at flat things that don't move. Like, it's just really difficult for the way my brain is built. But if a museum can explain something to me briefly with something that catches me, I'm like, oh, okay, now I can enjoy this space. So yes, thank you, John. Accessibility is usability. Right, and the more people start to experience inclusive groups of people, right? If you come to a dance jam and there are lots of different types of people, I think it helps everyone walk away from that experience feeling more connected to their fellow dancers, of course, but also it's like, oh yeah, there's that guy that lives around the block and I've never talked to him because I've been a little bit worried about talking to him, and now I feel like, oh, I can at least say hello, right? So we just, the more we can be sharing the space, sharing time together, hopefully in a creative maker environment, then I feel like there's incredible potential for our, especially American culture, but I can't speak for others necessarily. I think we could be at a really different place even just a few years from now.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, I guess I'll jump in. Yeah, I as I think about, I certainly wasn't clear about my path when I left Kenyon at all. And as I've seen over the last 20 years, there's been tremendous growth in civil society activism around disability, not only here in the United States, that's been going for quite a long time, but in other countries around the world. We certainly could not have really raised the issue of disability inclusion in international development programs or humanitarian assistance programs 20 years ago. People would scratch their heads completely. Same with mainstream human rights groups. Human Rights Watch now has a division on disability, and they're trying to do a much better job of incorporating a disability dimension into their work. So the tremendous shift that's been brought about by disability law and policy in all corners of the world, it is really exciting to see. And the field has grown exponentially in many different directions. So along with the DEI space generally, right? But seeing young disability rights activists doing work in the human rights field or the international development field or the humanitarian assistance field, or or going into disability law practice, for example, is something that would have been a little bit hard for me to imagine, back in the 90s, but that's a reality now. So it's really exciting to see young folks coming out of college and wanting to pursue, and they can do it, a career in whether it's disability law and policy or other types of work, or joining the Peace Corps and doing disability work. All of that is now possible, and it really, I don't believe, was when I graduated from Kenyon.
Okay, I think, especially in the past couple of years with COVID, I think that a lot of, this doesn't sound like a good thing, but a lot of the cracks in our various systems have definitely been exposed. And I think, at least from my point of view, even though it is easy to get discouraged about accessibility and about just the amount of mental health care that is needed that is not available, I do think that things are kind of shifting in a way where people are a lot more open about their mental health. I think, I don't know, I just feel like we can shift into kind of more of a community care mindset and really, I don't know, just support each other in a different way. And hopefully just over time, mental health care will become more accessible. And I hope that, this kind of trend of people feeling a little bit more comfortable addressing their mental health, I do hope that continues. And just that we can work to find people the help that they need.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. That's pretty powerful. The opportunity, right, that exists within the challenges of demands on services, for sure. And especially reaching out for help, people seeking support. Yeah. So this is kind of where we can stop and open it up to general questions. We can use the chat. Some people have posted some comments. You can post questions, or you can just raise your hand and pose a question to the panelists. Yeah, Amy.
I'd be curious to know, actually, I have a child in high school and he does have ADHD. I'm thinking a little bit about what college might look like for him. I'd be curious to have anyone comment on, are there things that are in place for young people with disabilities starting college? I graduated in 1990. I think it's probably quite different now, but I'd be interested to know what kinds of supports college students either at Kenyon or elsewhere might expect today that someone who went to college in the 80s wouldn't have been on offer then.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I might be the person to feel that, having worked in that field. There may be others as well, but I will say that students going to college now with attention deficit issues find a lot of supports, right? And a lot of common ground. And some of the supports that are in place for, let's say, captioning, for example, if I lose my focus of attention and I can't follow the train of thought, I've got the caption to look back at to bring me back to the conversation in a classroom. And that's happening more and more in our higher education classrooms. That's an informal support in some ways. It's not always available either. Sometimes students have to ask for that support. But students in college, that's the big thing. That's the big transition point between high school and college, is that students do need to advocate for themselves. So in preparation for your son going off to college, giving them that opportunity, right, to advocate for themselves and ask for help is a good place to start, for sure. So others on that particular question.
I don't know how to raise my hand electronically, but if I can jump in, you may
Sure.
have to recognize the name, suspected me when you said others. I worked for, I was a Kenyon psychology major who found the field of rehabilitation counseling with the assistance of my Kenyon advisor, and spent some years in voc rehab, but most of my career working with college students. Once I got my first job coordinating accommodations for college students, there was no going back. And I have to say a couple of things. One, really emphasize the self-advocacy, that it's important your son understands that he has to contact if he feels like he needs extended time or a quiet setting. He has to take the initiative for that. So many students just expect things to continue the way they did in high school. And the other thing is, I don't know if you're familiar, if you all are familiar with the term executive functioning, but that is so important, and it's such a huge thing for college students that struggle with that they have much more independent management of their homework. And I will say that's where technology has really helped. There are so many choices of My Homework and iStudies are two of them, but there's so many electronic planners really that can now help students with that. And in many colleges, the disability service folks will kind of help people learn to use those things as well.
You know, I could add something here. My role in disability starts with being a parent, and so I can talk about getting my own kid through a post-secondary program. So what I'd say is, we don't know anything about your kid, but there's a wide spectrum where there's support and help at regular colleges to do it, and then there's different levels of post-secondary programs, some of which are called colleges. In my case, it was post-secondary. I mean, where my son went, the appropriate place for him, they did life skills and employment training and that kind of stuff. He quote, got a college degree, but he really didn't. But that was the right school for him, and he's very successful today. So I would say is figuring out what the right match is between your child's abilities and disabilities and the program that you want to send them to is the trick, because it is a wide spectrum of high support, low support, high challenge, different challenges, academic, life skills, and you got to figure it. You just have to, and it's hard. And the best thing to do is talk to other parents. Find the parents that are 2, 3, 4 years ahead of you and find out what they did. That's the best source.
I see Erin is not on, so I thought I'd jump in. Hi, John, and hi, Janet.
Hi, Jerry.
Good to see you. A couple of things, and Dorothy, I want to mention, in the 1980s, for 10 years, I was the lobbyist for the state folk rehab agencies. So before my international development time, the thing I would like to raise, and it's in the context of the discussion on the transition from K through 12 to higher ed for students with disabilities, and it trends out in other areas. I think learners with disabilities are often met with low expectations by the educational professionals around them. You know, there's a statistic, and this is what got me started talking to Erin a couple of years ago. About 1 in every 7 high school graduates who are blind goes to college. The figure is much higher for students with hearing impairments, possibly because of the Gallaudet, the NTIDs of the world. And I talked to a neighbor of mine who was the former head of inclusive education from Montgomery County, Maryland, one of the wealthiest counties in the country. And I asked her about this, and she said, we trained them to be codependent. And she was being critical of her own agency, of her own, and she was actually transferred from being head of inclusive education for the county to being head of an elementary school principal because she was pushing inclusion too much. And I think we have in the tandem concern about low expectations is something more in international development and international human rights. It's sort of a check the box approach to disability. It's mentioned in the proposal. We have a pilot project. It's funded, you know, at a demonstration level, but the The exception is when it's brought to scale. And I think that's a concern. And I think those of us who are involved in the field, whether it's domestic or international, need to go in and be vocal with high expectations.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. I think that largely we look at, opportunities in education, higher education, as the glass is half empty when in fact it's more than half full. But reaching out to those constituents, right, that really do, might otherwise not look at colleges, I think is key, right? Making those opportunities available. Other questions for the panelists?
I wanted to add on to what had been previously been said in the higher education setting. So in the idea of advocating for oneself, and that's assuming that the student with a disability is looking and is seeking services. I had been the PI on a externally funded project that was increasing the number of STEM students at a large land grant institution. One of the challenges we had was that students, in wanting to, as many students do going to college, reinvent themselves, they didn't want to have the identity of being a student with a disability. So in particularly having a hidden disability, they would not advocate, they wouldn't identify, because they didn't want to be the student with a disability that they had been in high school. So that's just an additional, so it's more than not just advocating, it's being willing to have yourself be identified. And then related to what Jerry had said, there were students who, this institution had a very well-regarded engineering school, and a lot of the students with disabilities were in the engineering school. And they certainly did not want to be identified, because they felt that if the faculty knew that they were a student with a disability, that would somehow negatively impact them, whether it be expectations would be lowered or something like that. And I mean, to the extent that in our funding, we had a substantial scholarship for these students. They would not take the scholarship because they were afraid that somehow someone in the College of Engineering would find out they were getting the scholarship. So they would forego getting this money. Now, and the thing is, it wasn't that these students had any experience with faculty in the engineering college led them to believe that there'd be a problem. They just were not willing to take the chance that something would happen. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Just to say, that extends when those folks graduate and apply for jobs. I've had, I've hired cochlear implant users who tried to keep that hidden in the application and interview process.
Yeah.
I think that is such a crucial aspect of high school students being prepared for college. And I think there's two things that really are important in that. One is realizing, as you made reference to the person with a cochlear implant, the effects of not disclosing and people seeing the product but not realizing how unaccommodated disability creates that product, and having them come to see that as something they want to make sure to avoid. And second of all is coming to see learning to compensate for a disability as a valuable skill in and of itself, and something to be proud of. but it's tough. A lot of students don't want to disclose. You're absolutely right.
I always used to use the analogy, Dorothy, like if you came to college and you were wearing glasses in high school, why would you take them off and not use them in college, right? But it is hard, right? Because people don't want to stand out and they want to recreate themselves in that new setting. But I think maybe, Margot, you alluded to radical inclusion. Like this is something that's a concept that I think would enable students in higher education and in students, adults with mental health issues as well, to participate more fully. If they're greeted with this kind of concept of, well, radical inclusion. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about.
Yeah. And
how that
sorry if
works.
I'm
Sorry.
overusing the word radical because I know it's everywhere, but I noticed just in my family life, my kids went to a school that had a really great program for medically fragile students, and they had buddy systems. Like they did lots of special classes and events with all of the different grades, and I would kind of see some of that at parent gatherings and school functions. And it made me think, wow, some of these kids that go to elementary school here, they're definitely going to get involved in special education because they've had the chance to like really engage and have fun and learn and, make friends with kids in the medically fragile classroom. And then my son goes to middle school where the environment is really different. And I'm hearing how, oh yeah, the special ed kids are now in our PE class with no sensitivity around how to bring sixth graders just out of COVID lockdown for a year and a half are now. I was just like, oh my God, what is this school doing? Like the amount of just so much harm happening on all fronts for all the kids because the adults in the space don't know how to facilitate an inclusive environment, right? And part of me is like, God, I wish I could be in that gym. And then the other part of me is like, yeah, my son would hate me if I step into his school. But I do a lot of work with special education teachers and service organizations, so that's where I feel like I can be the most helpful. And we even build performance projects where the audience is very much participating in the performance experience, so that we leave those events, knowing more about the people that are sitting next to us and the people that are on stage. Yeah. So I'll stop there.
I'd like to ask a question. You mentioned just coming out of lockdown, and I'm curious what Emma has maybe mentioned some of this, but I'm curious what changes people see with what has the pandemic changed maybe for the worse? What has it changed for the better? And I'll start by answering my own question. I think particularly the work at home opening up has really helped a lot of people, particularly those with unpredictable chronic health conditions. The fact that everybody is now used to knowing how to make work at home possible is just a tremendous benefit, I think. But the other part of me goes, well, why pre-pandemic was that not a reasonable accommodation to so many employers, and so many employers refusing that, refusing flexible hours, refusing work from home. And suddenly when the entire nation has to work from home, they find a way to do it. And what, other than just making me mad and depressed, what does that instruct us as to the work ahead and where we can put our efforts. And you don't just have to focus on work from home, just in general, what changes have you seen with the pandemic?
I can jump in on this one. I think, like you said, Dorothy, I have talked a little bit about this, but I do think, at least in the medical field, also having telehealth appointments has been really valuable, both mental health and, just like general medicine. I think, for some of our patients who it's a big ordeal to try to get to a clinic, or maybe they need to see a specialist who's not in their area, things like that. I think it has kind of shown us that we can provide services in a more adaptable way. So I guess that's the positive. And then I think the negative is just at least in my specific work, the provider burnout is really, really high. So that's, doctors, therapists, caregivers. And that means that the demand for mental health services is really high, but the supply is low. And so, and I don't know that is necessarily directly related to COVID. I think we were probably in the medical field, we were heading in that direction for a while. But definitely we need a lot more services than we have. And COVID definitely showed, demonstrated that need.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I do a little bit of part-time teaching at University of Maryland Law School. And so, we did have to adjust to teaching online. And for me, I'm comfortable with that. One hopes I got better at doing that. But I ended up teaching a class this summer with a colleague who is based in France, and having it online enabled him to co-teach with me, but also enabled students who were doing evening classes and things. It was held at a time that was convenient for folks who were working full time. So I feel like now it's a little more acceptable to offer some online classes. Yes, you want to have in-person classes, but online can be good, at least for law teaching. I think it's pretty amenable to that. So that's a shift, and we've certainly seen a shift to even holding online UN meetings. That I don't think works very well. Part of the whole process of doing international work, UN work, is being in the room and interfacing with people. So I don't think that has worked so well. And I did a project in Zimbabwe also from afar, and that was really not suitable for working with the team, who had various internet issues and so forth. It was very difficult to get everybody on the same page and to communicate at the same time. So yeah, there was some positives, certainly, but definitely some shortfalls as well.
Certainly a lot of ups and downs, right, to the remote options versus in person. And Margot, you talked a little bit about this. Yeah, share what you shared with working with people with disabilities.
Oh, I was about to say something else.
Oh, sorry. Well, with regards to the remote classes that you've offered, I think you said that it's been very helpful, right, to have that option.
Yeah. When we started back March 2020, there were suddenly people were all at home, and we didn't know how long they would be at home. And at least the folks that I had been dancing with, and we had, just to explain a little bit, I work inside a service organization for people with disabilities, and pre-COVID, we were dancing with 150 people every week. Like, we were on site 3 days a week, nonstop. We had a whole performance project that would rehearse all day on Tuesday. It was very robust. And so suddenly people were at home and they weren't having the social engagement. They were sitting still a lot. They were they were losing their, overall basic physical stamina, flexibility, mobility, and a lot of communication skills were just not getting utilized. So that's been the power of having this class online, 45 minutes every day. And we altered I altered the shape of the class because I realized, oh, we're missing that time in a class where everybody's putting their shoes back on at the end. And you're like, hey, what are you doing today? Oh, well, I'm going to go do the thing, right? And so our class, the first half an hour is with microphones off, and we do physical warm-up, improvisation, choreography, and a closing ritual. And then for the folks that have to leave at 10:30, because it's snack break, and snack ritual is really important. For the people that have another 15 minutes, we dance at the, like we're all at the same club. And so it's like a big, we have a couple of music requests, and, I'm there in front of the screen to give people some ideas. But then we open up the mic and we talk about, some important topic. Usually somebody has a great question, or it's just really like, hey, what's next for your day? And so having to go online really did make me change up the way I think about a movement class, and what are all the benefits happening really, and how can we get that same sense of interaction and response to each other. But for myself as a dancer, this past 2.5 years without in-person stuff has been the hardest of my life, because I started dancing in a room full of people when I was 8. And so every cell in my body is sad. I'll just be straight up clear about that. And last year was probably the hardest of the 3, because I thought we were going to return. And because of, Delta and Omicron and, God, we're not expecting to return to pre-COVID levels for another year, right? So it's been amazing and horrible, but it's zero complaints. Just like it's been really intense, really intense.
I think you can have complaints. It's okay.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Hard,
Wait, who said that? Emma, did you validate my complaints? Thank you. You are a professional. I appreciate that.
A lot of great comments in the chat. I mean, Jerry made a comment about how, a lot of these online events aren't necessarily 508 compliant either. So there's lots of work to do in this field. I know we're near our end. Kim, did you want to add anything?
I just wanted to thank you all on the panel and everyone who's been so active in the chat and verbally, who've shared wisdom and asked questions. This has been such a wonderful, robust conversation that I think hopefully is the beginning of more conversations to follow. So I just want to express my appreciation for everyone for taking part in this conversation. And as I mentioned earlier, this is recorded and will be shared out. So please feel free to share it with your networks. We so appreciate you all.
Yeah.
Just a final comment. I know many of my classmates and I, and many of the folks in this screen would love to help Kenyon become even more inclusive. And feel free to reach out to us to be part of a network of professionals in the field that can do that on the side.
Thank you for offering that, Jerry. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful. Oh, I'm sorry. Was someone else trying to say something? Please
let me say something similar to that, because I had to step down from full-time work accommodating college students to take care of family needs, which have eased a little. And now I'm just trying to keep my finger a little bit in the accessibility advocacy arena. So this was a wonderful opportunity for me to do that. But anybody, just know I'm looking for opportunities for part-time disability advocacy.
Where are you based?
Bloomington, Indiana.
Terrific. Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope we see you soon on screen or in person. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Ciao, bye.
Thank you so